Hello, and welcome to Kloeker's Education Foundation, where we provide quality content for amazing teachers and students. If you're joining us from our previous video on the geography of Europe, welcome back. And if this is your first time, this is our World Geography series, and this lesson is on Russia and Central Asia. Before we get into it, don't forget to check out the description below for a link to a set of free guided notes for this lesson. Let's dive in. Now, Russia and Central Europe. If you took out Russia alone, it is 6,600 million square miles. The US is about 3.81 million square miles, Canada 3.85. In reference, if you took giant galactic scissors and cut Russia out of the face of the Earth, you could wrap it around Pluto and still have extra Russia left over, about 200 million square miles. Russia is the largest country on Earth. Now, the biggest country does not mean it has the most people. Russia has about 140 million people. The capital city, Moscow, Russian being the official languages, but being so vast, there are about 30 co-official languages within Russia. The current sitting president of Russia has been Vladimir Putin. He's been president for quite a long time, and it is a presidential federal republic, very similar to the United States with just a few minor differences. Now, Russia being so large, there are 9 time zones throughout Russia. There is, of course, Moscow time, and as you continue to go out west, but Russia also has a portion that is set in Eastern Europe known as Kaliningrad. Now this is, of course, having 1 hour ahead of whatever the time would be in Moscow, but 9 time zones for the length of this country is quite huge. Now, what's unique about Russia is Russia has very fertile soil. Eastern Europe, Central Asia has very fertile soil known as Chernozem, okay, the black earth. This is super fertile ground, and which has caused a lot of these Central Asian republics and even Eastern European and Russia to produce a lot of crops, specifically wheat. For example, Ukraine is often referred to as the breadbasket of Europe because of the wheat and the crops that it is growing. Very similar to the Midwestern United States, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and all the food that they produce for the US. Russia, Ukraine, the Central Asian republics produce similar amounts of food for the continent of Europe. Now, Russia has a very important mountain range that runs through the middle of it, the Ural Mountains running north to south through Europe. This is considered as the transition point, the boundary, which is going to separate the continent of Europe from that of Asia. Now, some people are going to say because the two continents are together, because Europe and Asia physically are connected, they are one continent, often called Eurasia. However, because of the distinct cultural identities, there are subcontinents, which we're going to talk about in future videos, but Europe is often referred to generally as its own continent compared to Asia. The Ural Mountains do extend down. We do have Central Asia, of course, countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and more. And you have the Transcaucasia region, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, which act as transitionary points or transitionary nations between Russia and other countries. Now, in the United States, you may have heard of Siberia. Now, generally, when we say Siberia, we think of a place that has 40 feet of snow and it's super cold. Siberia does not necessarily mean that. Siberia is in reference to the part of Asia or the part of Russia that lies east of the Ural Mountains, the part of Russia that lies within Asia. Okay. This is a very large region. It's not just the tundra as many people think it is. Siberia, that Asian part of Russia, is super rich and dense with resources, with coal, with petroleum, uranium, and several other resources. However, only about a fifth of the Russians live within that region because of the temperatures that cold, and that is generally why the United States and Western Europe has such a vision of what Siberia means. Now, the difference from the sea level and, of course, the moisture as it travels inland is going to cause quite a huge difference. In the summer within Siberia, it's going to be about 50 degrees. However, within the winter, it's going to get as low as negative 90 degrees in Siberia, which is absolutely freezing. The tundra only represents a small portion of Siberia and Russia. Most of Siberia is known as the taiga. Okay, these thick, dense forests are going to provide huge amounts of wood and resources for those that live out there. The vegetation is, of course, increasing as you get further and further south away from the Arctic. And as you continue to get further and further south, you get into what's known as the steppe, the major grasslands that run through Ukraine, Eastern Europe, through Russia, through Central Asia and the republics, and all the way through Mongolia into Manchuria. Now, Russia does struggle with rainfall, and Central Asia struggles with the amount of rain that falls within the region, because when the rain falls, it does not necessarily absorb into the soil, but instead turns into rivers and then settles in lakes and small oceans where the ground is saturated, where it cannot hold any water. So, for example, the Aral Sea, as you see in that top left photo, quite large. However, because of the declining rainfall and the fact that the Soviet Union blocked and dammed much of the rivers that fed into the Aral Sea has been shrinking rather dramatically. And you can see the progression of it going left to right as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then even towards the bottom right, where most of it has since evaporated. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a little bit. Now, while Central Asia struggles with the lack of rainfall, Russia does have a unique geographical feature known as Lake Baikal, or the Jewel of Russia. It is the deepest lake in the world. It is so deep there are even otters and sea lions that are native specifically to the lake, and it contains about a fifth of the world's freshwater just in one simple lake. And I'll show you here on this map. It is situated in Siberia, just south of the taiga. Now, the United States, North America developed the Transcontinental Railroad, which ran across the continent. Russia developed the Trans-Siberian Railroad, a railroad which extends from Moscow all the way to the eastern ports of Vladivostok, where you can take a train through the entire Russian countryside without ever stepping off of it. Now, this train, of course, took many years to complete. It was developed much later than the Transcontinental Railroad, about 6,000 miles long, just under, and took several thousands of workers to develop, but is quite an accomplishment for the trade and commerce and the growth of Siberia from Eastern Europe. Now, this next portion is just about 10 or so slides. We're going to go and talk about some of the historical pieces of Russia, whether it's the culture, whether it's the space race, or the rise of communism and the Russian Revolution. But starting at the beginning, the Russian Empire was a mix of Vikings and the Byzantine. Now, the Byzantine, if you want to check out our World History series about them, that is a remnant of the Eastern Roman Empire. They, of course, settled in Turkey and Greece, Constantinople, and later renamed Byzantium. The Vikings would travel through Russia, through the rivers and the lakes, like the Dnieper River, to trade with the Byzantine, and they settled in Russia. This Kievan Rus became the term for them. Okay, the Slavic people were those who farmed and expanded into the area and are a cultural marker for the region. Now, the Kiev and Rus and the Slavs have dominated the region. However, they have had others that have come and tried to take it from them. The Mongols, very famously, Genghis Khan rode into Russia on horseback with his archers, forcing the Russians to pay taxes to obey the Khan. However, they were conscious, or I guess good enough rulers, you could say, that they had few expectations after being conquered, where you were expected to pay your taxes to the Khan. If the Khan needed soldiers, you were expected to provide them. And if you had a religion, you were free to practice your religion as long as you prayed for the good health of the Khan. And so we see the Eastern Orthodox, or the Orthodox Catholic faith, staying strong in Eastern Europe. We see the language staying strong, and we do not see the diffusion of Mongol culture into Slavic culture. Now, Ivan IV, the Tsar Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, as he's very famously called, is not going to be a fan of the Mongols. He's very famously going to stand them down at a river, which the name is escaping me right now, but you can look up how he defeated the Mongols. But despite the fact that he, quote, liberated the Russians and saved the Russians from the Mongols, he did not have an heir. And so when he died, power passed down to Mikhail Romanov. And the Romanovs dominated Russian political society for over 300 years, from 1613, which is prior to or about the time of the discovery of Jamestown, all the way to the Russian Revolution. They're going to be running the show. Now, Romanovs like Peter are going to try and modernize Russia. He, of course, is going to go into Western Europe. He's going to try and bring the technology back to the Russian Empire to modernize it. He's going to very famously put in taxes on having things like a beard. He wanted people to be clean shaven. He wanted them to adopt the Western European ways. His wife is going to keep expanding the Russian Empire, Catherine the Great, and eventually power is going to reach a man, Nicholas II, who is going to be in charge of the Russian Empire up until World War I, where we see the rise of communism. He'll lose popularity and ultimately lose political power during World War I. Now, during World War I, Russia is going to struggle with trying to fight the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, with trying to fight the Germans. It's going to go very bad. The Russian people will lose faith in Nicholas II, and so the Communist Party, which will be rising and kind of propagated by German finance, Vladimir Lenin is going to take over, promising the Russian people peace, land, and bread as his slogan for power. Now, when they are taking over, there becomes two armies within Russia. There is the White Army and, of course, the Red Army. There's a division within the parties of those who want to fight and stay in World War I. There are those that want to end the war and start a new nation. And so this red and white with the Mensheviks, the Kingsmen, who want to stay in and fight and continue the glory of the Russian Empire, and the Bolsheviks, who want to end the war, begin a new government of communism. And after several years of fighting, the Bolsheviks will win, establishing communism as the main form of government for Russia, now known as the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union consists of the Soviet Union and several other states around it, modern-day states such as Ukraine, such as Kazakhstan and Central Asia, and of course the Transcaucasus nations, which we just spoke about. Lenin is going to lead the Soviet Union for a short period of time. However, when he dies, there are two men that are going to battle out for power, and Stalin, Joseph Stalin, is going to come out the victor. He's going to take his place as the dictator of the Soviet Union, and he wants to modernize the Soviet Union, much like Peter the Great. Now, unfortunately for Stalin, the Soviet Union does get pulled into World War II when the Nazis launched their invasion Operation Barbarossa, and of course that causes kind of a delay in the modernization process. However, with the help of the United States, the Soviets win in World War II. With World War II being over, the Soviet Union and the U.S. don't agree on many issues. This, of course, leads to what we call the Cold War, which was a series of proxy wars or a war of ideology between the United States and the Soviet Union. Neither one of us officially dropped bombs or went to war with each other, but we spent millions of dollars building up our arsenals, trying to be more intimidating and more scary than the Soviet Union, and they, of course, did the same. Fortunately for us, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991 after going pretty much bankrupt after several reforms of glasnost and perestroika. We have videos on that if you want to check that out in our World History series. The Transcaucasus region has, of course, coming out of this, acting as a buffer zone between the Soviet Union, Russia, and the Middle East, is going to be a huge point of cultural diffusion, with many trade routes and many cultures in the area that causes a lot of conflict. Most people in the region are either going to fall into the Orthodox Christianity or into the Armenian Christianity, or they're going to fall into that of Islam. Now, because of the differences that causes a lot of conflict, lots of conflict between the three of them, the Turkish and the Armenians, of course, the Russians and the Georgians, and even groups within Russia, known as Chechnya, are going to want to fight for their independence. And of course, with the Soviet Union, there's going to be massive bloodshed, wanting them to maintain power. The Soviets will re-invade in the 90s, killing hundreds of thousands of people. They'll again try to revolt in the early 2000s, but again, the Soviet or the Russians will re-establish control of the region through military force. Now, the Soviets, in their attempt to modernize themselves and modernize Eastern Europe after World War II, began to push for nuclear power as it is the Cold War, or as it was the Cold War. And very iconically, a nuclear power plant in Ukraine known as Chernobyl it had a meltdown, killing about 31 people and spreading massive amounts of radiation across Europe. Russia hid the accident. However, our radiation detectors and radiation detectors in Europe were going off with a vast amount of radiation entering the atmosphere. We thought someone had launched a nuclear missile. However, it was just the meltdown at Chernobyl, and this has scared many Americans and many Europeans out of the idea of nuclear power. But Russia has maintained a very active role in trying to promote their ideas, their beliefs, their sphere of influence. For example, in 2011, when the Syrian civil war broke out, Russia is going to support the King Assad, as you can see the two of them in the left-hand side. The U.S., of course, is going to support the rebels who are fighting against the king. This is when we have the rise of ISIS, which has all but been destroyed by the United States and our allies, in addition to the Syrians and the Russians. This is when we have the rise of ISIS because of the power vacuum with King Assad and the civil war. However, in December of 2024, the rebels seized the capital. Assad has fled the country and taken refuge in Russia, and just recently changed the Syrian flag from a red, white, and black with green stars to a green, white, and black with red stars. Now, that wraps up our lesson. Thank you for joining us. Our next unit on the geography of Africa is just a click away. I'll see you there.